Oh yeah, welcome and thanks again to everyone for joining us today to learn more about our new report, Municipal Contributions to Canada's Protected Areas Target, a review of wise practices in Ontario. Before we proceed with the rest of the webinar, I'm going to open the session with the land acknowledgement for the area from which I'm joining, which is now known as the City of Waterloo. And as we all know, the lands of Turtle Island, now known as North America, have been inhabited and cared for by diverse Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and continue to be inhabited by diverse Indigenous peoples to this day. Waterloo specifically is situated within the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawandaron people. This area is party to the Between the Lakes Treaty 3 and the Haldeman Treaty, and there are active and ongoing investigations and rights claims related to those Haldeman Treaty lands surrounding the Grand River, which I'd encourage anyone, and especially those who are living in and around the Grand River, to learn more about that any time you've got the time. This area is also party to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people and extending to all inhabitants of the land. To peacefully share the land or the dish by taking only what we need, being sure to keep the dish clean, and always leaving enough for others, including future generations. As a person of European descent working for a conservation-based organization, I recognize my responsibility to uphold the principles of the Dish with One Spoon, to reflect on the ongoing impacts of settler colonialism on Indigenous peoples, and to take action within my sphere of influence to begin to question and undo colonial ideologies. Indigenous peoples' ways of living sustained thriving ecosystems that included human communities for millennia prior to the arrival of European settlers. To continue to exclude Indigenous peoples and their traditional practices from the land and waters not only violates their constitutional treaty and inherent rights and further perpetuates the harms of settler colonialism, but also undermines the health of our shared environment to the detriment of us all. We're all on our own journeys of learning these truths and realizing our roles in moving towards or moving forward, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. And today I just ask that everyone listening in keep these truths in mind as we proceed with the webinar and any discussions that we have at the end. So to give you a little more background on the speakers you'll be hearing from today, my co-presenter Kelsey Bonnyman and I both work on the conservation policy team here at Ontario Nature. And we are two of the co-authors of the Municipal Wise Practices report we'll be talking about today. I joined the team in 2022, and I'm now working as the Conservation Planning Coordinator. Since August of 2022, I've supported several municipalities and conservation authorities in contributing their lands to the 30 by 30 target, or Canada's Protected Areas target. And I also lead coordination of our wetlands campaign, if that's of interest to anyone here. Kelsey joined our team in 2023 and has supported several municipal and conservation authority contributions since then as well. And we've also both worked on a range of communications and other resources related to this work, including, as I said, the report. And collectively, Ontario Nature has been working to support local contributions to Canada's Protected Areas target for about 4 years now. I'll also just give a quick introduction to Ontario Nature for those of you who might not be familiar with our organization. Ontario Nature has been a voice for nature since 1931, with the mission to protect wild species and wild spaces through conservation, education, and public engagement. Ontario Nature is a charitable conservation organization representing over 30,000 individual members and supporters, and over 150 member groups across Ontario. These groups make up our nature network and are a strong grassroots voice for nature across the province. We also work as a land trust with 26 nature reserves across the province, and we have our magazine, of course, which John mentioned in his own introduction. And with that, I'll just pass things right on over to Kelsey to bring us into the content for today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelsey. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to start us off with an introduction to the 30 by 30 target and what it means for protecting biodiversity at the municipal level. And then we'll take a look at progress on the target in Ontario to date. Then Sarah will present the new report on municipal contributions to the 30 by 30 target and how this report may be useful for your municipality. We'll also review opportunities to participate and where to get support. And then we'll wrap up our presentation, hopefully a bit before 3 p.m. And we'll spend the rest of the time hosting a discussion period and answering any of your questions. Okay, so to get to know you a little, we have 3 quick polling questions. So you should be seeing that pop up on your screen shortly. Okay, I see it. If anyone has issues with the poll, just let us know in the chat. You'll see questions like who you are and what your role is within your organization, where you're joining us from. And then scrolling down to the bottom, you'll also see another question about what your level of familiarity is with Canada's protected areas target, which is also known as 30 by 30. And I'll leave a few more moments as I'm seeing some questions answered here, so that's great. And then just a note while we wait for everyone's answers, if yours don't happen to fall into these categories, feel free to write your answer out in the chat. And if you have experience with us, working with us, feel free to let us know in the chat as well. We see some familiar faces, or names rather, which is wonderful. Okay, great. A few more to participate, but we'll start looking through. We've got lots of different municipal representatives and different partner organizations. I'm seeing a lot of people coming from the Greater Golden Horseshoe, but there's some from Northern Ontario. Oh, awesome. Hi, Adam. And we've got some people very familiar with the 30 by 30 target, some unfamiliar, and that's great. No matter what, we're going to be going over the 30 by 30 target, so don't worry about that. Okay. I think we'll leave it there. If we're moving too quick, feel free to use the chat. But we'll move forward, I think. Thanks everyone for answering the poll. Okay, so to provide a bit of common understanding for those who may not be familiar with 30 by 30, I'll provide a brief background as to how this target came to be, as it forms the basis for our report. So the 30 by 30 target is among 4 goals and 23 targets set out in what's known as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And this biodiversity framework was ratified by nearly 200 nations, including Canada, at COP15 in 2022. And the overarching purpose of this framework is to set out achievable goals to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And it represents a call to action for all levels of government. We won't be going over all 23 targets of the framework today, but these targets are interconnected, ranging from enhancing green space in urban planning, reducing environmental pollution, and integrating biodiversity in decision-making across all levels of government. But as we've mentioned, today we'll be narrowing our focus to target number 3, known as 30 by 30. Okay, target 3, it really expresses the commitment to protect at least 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030. And this target prioritizes the protection and conservation of natural areas that are important to biodiversity, which includes natural systems that are ecologically representative, well-connected, and equitably governed. Recognition of and respect for Indigenous rights and territories are central to the target, as is the need to ensure that areas that count towards the target contain land uses that are consistent with conservation outcomes, meaning decision-making and on-the-ground actions are contributing to biodiversity conservation. No doubt 30 by 30 seems pretty ambitious, but 30% is the absolute minimum we must aim to achieve if we're to address the dual crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change. And this target represents one pathway forward and there are numerous participants across the country already making some good headway. So, to give you a sense of where things stand, Canada is hovering at just under 14% of recognized protected areas nationally, with less than 11% recognized in Ontario. And the map you see here shows all the areas that are currently recognized as counting towards the target in Ontario. And you may notice Southern Ontario does not have very many protected areas recognized, which is partially due to pressures like heavy development to support the most densely populated area in Canada. And then other factors for this lack of recognition in this region is that lands and waters owned and managed by municipalities, conservation authorities, and other land managers don't automatically contribute to the 30 by 30 target. These areas must be assessed first to see if they qualify, which is part of our role here at Ontario Nature. We conduct assessments on behalf of partners to see if their natural areas qualify, and we work together to strengthen protections where they don't. And if we're just looking at the stats on the screen, it appears there's a long way to go to reach 30%. However, we see this target as a chance to not only gather momentum for additional contributions, but also to increase awareness and strengthen protections for biodiversity at the local level. And before we move on, I'd like to just clarify that when lands and waters are submitted to the target, this doesn't change ownership or management of these areas. The target is largely a tool for recognizing lands and waters that are managed in a way that effectively conserves biodiversity to a standardized set of criteria. It essentially allows us to see where we're at and where we need to go, while celebrating all the efforts that are taking place to conserve our most sensitive natural systems and the biodiversity that rely on them. All right, Sarah, we're good to go to the next slide, please. All right, perfect. To provide a bit of background on Ontario Nature's role and our experience as a third-party assessor, since 2020, we have partnered with 8 conservation authorities and 8 municipalities to assess and facilitate their contributions to the target, which has resulted in nearly 23,000 hectares being added to the national database. And this year, we've worked with 9 additional partners to submit 14,000 hectares towards the target, and these assessments are currently under review. And now Ontario Nature is not the only organization working in this space. There are groups like Ontario Land Trust Alliance and the Biosphere Networks that play a similar role in supporting 30 by 30 contributions. We are interested in collaborating with different partners as well as other landholders to encompass a diverse network of protected and conserved areas. And these partnerships include land trusts, nature conservancies, Indigenous communities, and academic institutions, to name a few. And we're currently exploring ways in which we can work together. So another part of the work that we do, including the creation of this new report, which Sarah will be soon talking to you about, is driven by our involvement in a national coalition called the Municipal Protected Areas Program, short form MPAP. And MPAP partner groups are from all across Canada, and they include Nature Canada, BC Nature, us at Ontario Nature, Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts, and Wildlands League. And our collective goal is to encourage and support municipalities and other organizations to contribute to the target, mainly across southern Canada, where protected areas are under-recognized. The coalition advocates for strong conservation standards, and as mentioned, we complete assessments on behalf of our partners for the natural areas they hope to contribute. And recently, the MPAP Coalition released a website to provide resources for partners who are interested in potentially contributing to the target. And so, John, if you don't mind sharing the link to the website in the chat, that would be great. And then at the end, we'll recirculate this link in our follow-up email after the webinar, so you can take a look through all these resources in your own time. Okay, so we have arrived at the new report, which is the focus of today's webinar. Thank you so much for listening to my introduction. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kelsey. And thanks again, everyone, for your patience in those little technical difficulties. Hopefully, all goes well moving forward. And yeah, as Kelsey said, I'm going to spend the next 20 or so minutes talking to you about our new report, Municipal Contributions to Canada's Protected Areas Target, a review of wise practices in Ontario. And John, if you could just pop the link to that report as well into the chat, that would be great. And we'll also include that in the follow-up emails you'll receive after the webinar, so it'll be super easy for everyone to find. And the report was created as part of our contributions to that Municipal Protected Areas program Kelsey mentioned, and it's informed by Ontario Nature's several years of experience helping municipal and other partners have their lands recognized as contributing to the 30 by 30 target. I'll be going over some highlights from the report, including several of the wise practices that we feature that set these municipalities up for success and support biodiversity in their regions. And I'll also just make a quick note here before moving on that this report, including its title, uses the term wise practices rather than best practices. And that's for a couple of reasons. So first, best practices kind of implies this assumption that certain practices are going to be the best in all situations, which experience shows us is really not a reality. So conservation strategies that work well in one local context might not be as successful or as well suited to another local context, and that's totally okay. Second, one or even a handful of authors or people can't possibly know about every strong conservation practice that's out there. And there might be some really great things happening that are at the municipal level, but that we don't know about or that fell kind of outside of the scope of this report. And then lastly, the term best can also sort of imply an assumption that there's no need or room for policies or practices to be updated or improved as we all continue to learn and accept new ways of knowing, which we also know is untrue. So for all those reasons, we really felt the term wise practices is a little bit more suitable, and we use that term throughout. And just one last thing before I dive into the real content of the report, I want to give a huge thank you to the wonderful reviewers who provided their insights, knowledge, and perspectives to the report. Brianna Barnhart and Carrie Ann Charles of KBM Indigenous Professional Services and Michael Winia of Krista Wynn Consulting. This report really would not have been as strong as it is without their contributions, and we're really grateful to have their support. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to Environment and Climate Change Canada for their financial support of this project through the Municipal Protected Areas program. So the purpose of the report. The report aims to promote this opportunity for municipalities to contribute to the 30 by 30 target. And it curates and provides practical real-world examples to help municipalities understand how they can use their planning authority and land management authority to protect biodiversity in line with these pan-Canadian criteria for contributing to the 30 by 30 target, which I'll introduce on the next slide. It also introduces some ideas around how municipal natural areas management and contributions to 30 by 30 can support positive relationship building with Indigenous peoples and communities and to contribute to local reconciliation efforts. At a larger scale, our goal is really to help empower you all to embrace a leadership role in protecting natural ecosystems in your communities while potentially contributing to the 30 by 30 target. The target and this report really promotes the mindset that everyone has to work together if we're going to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And 30 by 30 is one achievable pathway for municipalities to do so. So as I mentioned, all lands recognized as counting towards the 30 by 30 target have to meet 4 overarching pan-Canadian criteria for protected and conserved areas. And those criteria really help to ensure consistency and quality of contributions to the 30 by 30 target across the country. The criteria are described in detail in section 3 of the report, but I'll give a quick overview of them now so we're all on the same page in terms of what they are. So first, the site has to have well-defined and agreed upon boundaries to facilitate a submission. And that's partly because the boundaries of the site have to be submitted to this geographic database that documents progress towards the target. And that's called the Canadian Protected and Conserved Areas Database. And that's the information that we used to create that map a few slides ago during Kelsey's introduction. And it's also because it's a lot easier to protect an area when everyone knows and agrees upon what space you're actually talking about. Next, there has to be effective measures in place for the governing authority, which is most often going to be the landowners and or managers, to prohibit or otherwise limit activities that could be negatively impacting biodiversity. And that's going to look different in each context, but we're thinking maybe activities with a big potential impact, like a development or certain types of recreational uses that are more intensive and might be negatively affecting biodiversity at the site. It really depends on the context. But there must also be frameworks in place that then compel the landowners or managers to ensure those measures are enforced. The third criterion is that the protection must be long-term, year-round, and difficult to reverse. And this criterion is typically assessed by looking at how long a particular site has been managed for conservation, the overall intent and longevity of any management plans and policies that support conservation of the site. And we also will look at the process for reversing, changing, or removing those plans and policies to try to ensure that the protections couldn't just be easily removed with, say, a change in leadership. And finally, the site must be managed by the governing authority or authorities, again, landowners and or managers, so that conservation outcomes are actually achieved. So evidence demonstrating how the site is contributing to on-the-ground biodiversity conservation is really important to show that the site being protected is actually providing that benefit to biodiversity, which is the whole intent of this target. And yeah, as Kelsey mentioned, part of the work that Ontario Nature does in our role as an assessor and supporter of our municipal partners is to really compare these criteria to the plans, policies, and actions of the municipal partners we're working with and determine if all four are met. And if they are, then they can contribute those lands that they're interested in contributing to the 30 by 30 target. Section 4 really contains all the featured wise practice examples, and it makes up the bulk of the report. And this section is structured around 9 themes of wise practices called approaches, which are aligned with the Pan-Canadian criteria I just introduced. For each approach, we identify which criteria it contributes to meeting and provide real-world examples from municipalities that have already contributed to the 30 by 30 target to show exactly how municipalities are conserving their natural areas in line with those criteria. And although the scope of this report is within Ontario and all the examples are from Ontario municipalities, it could still be relevant to municipalities and local governments across Canada because it is the same Pan-Canadian criteria used during assessments. Maybe just the names of the bylaws or policies might be a little bit different, but in principle, the same concepts can be applied. And as I go through some of these approaches and examples, you might recognize some practices that your municipality already has in place. And that's really great news because it shows the ways that you're already demonstrating leadership in local conservation efforts and might already be meeting some or all of the criteria for contributing to 30 by 30 if you are interested. You might also notice some opportunities to strengthen various policies, plans, and other approaches to natural area land use planning and management. And in those cases, if there are some, we really hope the report can serve as a model for helping to improve your local conservation efforts, while of course recognizing that local contexts will vary and the exact approach that you take might need to be adapted to suit your local context. So I'm going to go through a few of these approaches and examples now. And the first approach I want to highlight is the strategic acquisition of natural areas for conservation purposes. And this approach really contributes to meeting all four criteria of the Pan-Canadian standard. The municipalities featured in the report for this approach are the cities of Brampton, Kitchener, and Toronto. And both Brampton and Kitchener have leveraged their development approvals process to secure city ownership of natural areas. And that's really allowed them to move natural areas into public ownership, even when competing with significant development pressures. And they've done this by requiring certain natural areas to be transferred to the city or to city ownership as a condition of development approval. And that's knitted right into their official plans. In a slightly different approach, Toronto has established a parkland acquisition strategy, which provides a framework of strategic goals and priorities, guiding the city's decisions on which lands to acquire. One of the priorities in this strategy is to acquire, manage, and protect priority natural areas. And by establishing clear goals and priorities for land acquisitions that emphasize conservation, the city ensures that it's using its finite resources to prioritize the acquisition of spaces that will have the greatest positive impact. And these strategies have allowed each of these municipalities to bring significant natural areas into their ownership, which they can then protect and manage in line with the criteria for 30 by 30. The next approach that I'll be highlighting are policies to protect natural areas from incompatible activities, which is largely captured in sections 4.4 and 4.5 of the report. And wise practices under these approaches are really critical contributors to meeting that effective means and long-term protection criteria for contributing to the 30 by 30 target. The municipalities featured for these approaches include the cities of Brampton, Kitchener, Guelph, and Toronto, as well as Dufferin County. And the types of examples we feature in the report include official plan policies and designations, zoning and other bylaws, parkland classifications and bylaws, and forest management plans and bylaws. So I won't go through the details of every example from the report, which you can read in your own time if you're interested later, but I will highlight a few. So as the primary and binding policies guiding municipal land use planning decisions, official plan policies and zoning bylaws are really quite critical to securing that meaningful, effective long-term protection for municipal natural areas. Having clear policies and corresponding zoning to protect natural features from development and site alteration is really key to meeting these criteria around effective long-term protection. So for instance, the city of Guelph really clearly states in its official plan that all natural heritage features are to be protected. And that policy is supported in their zoning bylaw, which establishes a natural heritage system zone encompassing all natural heritage features in the city and limits permitted uses of these areas to conservation activities and legally existing uses, buildings, and structures. So this really establishes clear requirements for natural areas in the city to remain in a natural state. Kitchener employs a really similar approach, using their official plan and zoning bylaw to protect core natural heritage features. And they also establish a natural areas parks classification within their park strategic plan. And that prioritizes the management of city-owned natural areas to maintain ecosystems in their natural state. And I'll just highlight as well here that while both of these municipalities use the natural heritage system terminology, your municipality might use different language like greenlands or greenway systems or environmental protection areas, to name a few. And the name doesn't really matter, but establishing these really clear and binding protections through land use planning is a really strong approach to meeting these criteria. To give a slightly different example, Dufferin County uses their county forest and rail trail bylaw, which reflects their county forest management plan, to restrict what visitors to their county forest properties can do. So among other restrictions, visitors are prohibited from interfering with or otherwise harming plants or natural objects in the forest, or allowing their dogs to roam off leash, which we know can be really disruptive to wildlife and plants on the properties. And Brampton also establishes similar restrictions to visitor behaviors within their park properties using a parkland bylaw. And then, of course, any contraventions to these bylaws can be enforced by designated officials like municipal bylaw officers who can issue a fine or remove a person from the area, providing that means to really discourage and halt these types of activities that could be negatively affecting natural ecosystems. Next, I'm going to highlight wise practices around monitoring biodiversity and taking stewardship action. And those are approaches which are largely captured by sections 4.7 and 4.8 of the report. And these practices can contribute to both the effective means criterion and to demonstrating that positive biodiversity outcomes have been achieved. The municipalities featured in the report for these wise practice approaches include the cities of Guelph, Toronto, and Brampton. And among these municipalities, there's a broad range of approaches that they've used to gather information about and effectively steward their natural areas. And this can include natural heritage and forest management plans, natural asset inventories and management plans, biodiversity strategies to be a little more on the nose, and various restoration and naturalization plans, and programs. And again, I'll only be speaking to a few examples here today in the interest of all our time. But I'd encourage you to refer back to the report if you're interested in learning more about this as well. So Toronto has taken a real partnership approach to monitoring, working with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority and the University of Toronto to implement monitoring efforts outlined in their biodiversity strategy. Together, these partners can do some more comprehensive monitoring of species, habitats, and ecological conditions, including long-term ecological monitoring plots. And then that can help inform conservation and restoration efforts. And this really shows that there's power in creating these partnerships among municipalities and local allies in conservation. So municipalities don't have to do it alone. Everyone's working with finite resources in terms of finances, staff, equipment. So creating those partnerships is a really great way to help make things happen. Another example is Guelph's Natural Assets Inventory, which documents which natural ecosystems exist in the city and where, what condition they're in, the functions, services that each ecosystem provides, and the risks that it might be facing. This information can then be used to inform and advocate for investment in taking action to support the continued health and functioning of these ecosystems. That way, they can continue to provide their various essential services to surrounding communities, like clean air and flood control, while also continuing to support the diversity of species that depend on them. And finally, plans and programs that guide stewardship actions are really important to maintaining and enhancing ecosystem health, especially in more urbanized or heavily developed environments where natural ecosystems are under a lot of pressure. And this could take the form of site-specific management and restoration plans, like the one we featured for Toronto that they created for Taylor Creek Park. Or there could be more system-wide programs like Brampton's Valleys and Parks Naturalization Program or Guelph's strategy to really minimize the effect of invasive emerald ash borer on its forests by trying to control the outbreak and restore areas that have been really significantly affected. And one final theme of wise practices that we feature in the report that's a little bit different from the rest of the ones I've mentioned so far is the importance of building relationships and partnerships with Indigenous peoples premised on efforts to protect and conserve biodiversity. While the criteria for contributing to the 30 by 30 target don't explicitly recognize the need to engage or partner with Indigenous peoples in the management or stewardship of natural areas at this point, That doesn't negate the importance of creating safe spaces and opportunities to do so. In fact, the 30 by 30 target, as written in the Global Biodiversity Framework, specifically includes the importance of ensuring protected and conserved areas recognize and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples, as Kelsey mentioned in the introduction. And also, as I had mentioned during the land acknowledgement, the conservation movement as we know it is ultimately rooted in settler colonialism. And most protected areas have been created without the consent of Indigenous peoples who continue to be forcibly excluded from their ancestral and contemporary territories in the name of conservation. This has been incredibly damaging to Indigenous peoples' cultures, languages, governance, laws, and ways of living, as well as to the ecosystems Indigenous peoples have lived with and stewarded for millennia prior to the arrival of European settlers. It's really important that collective efforts to protect and conserve natural areas also support Indigenous leaders in the revitalization of Indigenous cultures, traditional practices, and reconnection with the land. Municipalities can contribute to this movement by reflecting on their relationships with local Indigenous peoples, including those living in urban areas, and creating opportunities to build those positive relationships and partnerships for the management and stewardship of municipal natural areas moving forward. The report highlights examples from the City of Toronto's Reconciliation Action Plan and Northumberland County's Forest Management Plan, both of which include commitments and specific actions aimed at creating opportunities for Indigenous peoples to reconnect with the land and be involved with decision-making affecting natural areas. We also highlight some additional opportunities to adapt the other kinds of approaches to local conservation so that they may also contribute to advancing reconciliation. We encourage municipal staff to reflect and consider working with local Indigenous peoples to determine which of these opportunities could be adapted to fit their local contexts and treaty territories, or to determine a new path forward that is more appropriate to their unique situation. And as we continue working to support local conservation efforts and contributions to 30 by 30, we at Ontario Nature and our Municipal Protected Areas Program partners continue to explore and support opportunities for Indigenous peoples to be involved in discussions around protecting, conserving, and stewarding natural areas, and to be better represented and included in the process of contributing to the 30 by 30 target. So now that we've explored some of these examples for how municipalities have been able to contribute to the 30 by 30 target, let's talk a little bit more about the why. So achieving the 30 by 30 target really requires that collaborative cross-Canada effort, and it can't be done without local decision makers like municipalities. By advancing local conservation efforts and contributing to the target where you can, your municipality can really be part of the solution to the biodiversity crisis that the Global Biodiversity Framework and 30 by 30 target aim to address. Being recognized as contributing to the 30 by 30 target can also really validate the effectiveness of your conservation efforts by demonstrating and validating that you meet those pan-Canadian criteria for protected and conserved areas. Being acknowledged for your conservation leadership can then also help to foster a sense of pride and responsibility within your community. And this recognition might inspire community members to get more involved and could even inspire other neighboring municipalities to follow suit, really contributing to a broader culture of environmental stewardship within and beyond your municipality. Contributing to the 30 by 30 target can also enhance your municipality's standing as a leader in environmental conservation. And this recognition can help to attract funding, partnerships, and further opportunities to advance conservation efforts. Similarly, exploring opportunities to contribute to the 30 by 30 target could foster new partnerships and or strengthen existing collaboration among local governments, conservation groups, and Indigenous communities. And finally, As I mentioned earlier, areas that contribute to the 30 by 30 target are added to that Canadian Protected and Conserved Areas database, which tracks progress across the country. And this data can be used to inform policy decisions. It supports national and international reporting on this target and other biodiversity efforts. And it also serves as a vital resource for large-scale conservation planning and research. So lots of great reasons to get involved. Now, as more and more municipalities and other organizations recognize the value of contributing to the 30 by 30 target and begin to get involved, momentum is growing. Work on 30 by 30 isn't being done in isolation, and there's quite a lot of movement in the municipal protected areas world. Within the Municipal Protected Areas Program Coalition, for example, both BC Nature and us here at Ontario Nature work directly with our municipal partners to help support contributions to 30 by 30 by taking that lead role in conducting assessments to determine if they meet the necessary criteria. We've highlighted our own work extensively enough in previous slides, but BC Nature has also worked with several large municipalities, including Whistler, so that they can support their contributions to the target. And our two organizations regularly connect as well to share what we've learned through our assessment work with each other. Our partners at the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts, in collaboration with regional partners like the Land Trust Alliance of BC, Ontario Land Trust Alliance, and the Réseau des milieux naturels protégés in Quebec, have created some really fantastic reports aiming to provide municipalities and other conservation groups with tools to advance local conservation and contributions to 30 by 30. Listed here are three of their reports: conservation options for municipalities across Canada, land conservation with public benefits, incentives, funding, and process supports in Canada, and potential for partnerships, Indigenous communities, municipalities, and environmental groups collaborating together. And we'll provide those links, the links to those resources, sorry, in the chat. If you don't mind doing that, please, John, as well as in the follow-up email again. So all of these are really accessible for everyone here who might be interested. Wildlands League has also been a major supporter of the National Urban Park movement, and they're currently in various stages of supporting 3 national urban park initiatives in Ontario, including one in Windsor, all of which would increase contributions to the 30 by 30 target. And last but certainly not least, Nature Canada plays a really invaluable role in coordinating the coalition's efforts, and has created a website, which we shared earlier, and we'll have in the follow-up email, to really support resource and knowledge sharing among those who are interested in this initiative. And all of this really just to say that there's a lot of great work happening, which is creating this growing body of support that can be available for those who are interested in contributing to this target. So we're getting close to the end here, and if anything that we've spoken about today has struck a chord with you, we really recommend that you check out our report and perhaps some of those other resources that we provided links for, or which are available on the Municipal 30 by 30 website, and reflect on your municipality's approach to protecting and managing natural areas. If you feel like you can relate to any of the examples featured in the report or elsewhere, you could very likely be ready to contribute. And if you are interested in learning more about this initiative, or you think your municipality owns natural areas that could be recognized as contributing to 30 by 30, we'd love to talk to you. So Kelsey's information is there on the screen, and with all of the resources will be provided in the follow-up email, so you can reach out to her and set up a conversation or ask any further questions that you might think of. And with that, thank you all so much for attending today and for listening to us. We've been talking a lot over the past 50 minutes, and now we really want to hear from you. So if you haven't already done so, feel free to pop any questions that you have into the Q&A function, or if it's easier to speak your question, then you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, and you can ask it that way. And we can really start to have a bit of a discussion about the report and municipal contributions to 30 by 30. Um, so John, also, if you could please stop the recording now for the discussion period, then we can do that. That'd be great. And I will stop my screen share.